What if the fate of the world was foretold nearly a century ago? What if the signs are all around us? And the time has finally come. This isn't science fiction. This is a prophecy, one that might be unfolding right now. Imagine being able to glimpse the future not in vague riddles or symbolic dreams, but in sharp, specific flashes of fate. The kind of visions that tell you exactly what will happen, and exactly when. Most of us would call that impossible. But history tells a different story. And it begins with a woman whose eerie predictions have stunned the world for decades. If you've ever heard of Jeane Dixon, you know her name carries a strange weight. To some, she was a modern-day oracle. To others, a curious anomaly in the age of logic. But regardless of what people believed, her prophecies unfolded all the same, one after another, like ticking dominoes. And now, her most terrifying vision has reached its final date. She once claimed that the year 2025 would mark a decisive turning point in human history. A year of upheaval, a year that could either lead us toward an era of peace or plunge us into chaos beyond anything we've seen before. But what exactly did she see? And why have so many other mysterious voices echoed the same date? Let's begin with the prophecy itself, and the woman who first dared to speak it aloud. January 10th, 1942. The war raged across continents, but inside an upscale beauty salon in Los Angeles, far from the front lines, something far stranger unfolded. Carole Lombard, beloved actress, and one of Hollywood's brightest stars, was preparing for a relaxing day of pampering. The salon catered only to the elite, a place where celebrities and socialites could momentarily forget the weight of the world. But what Carole didn't know was that her fate had just entered the room behind her. A middle-aged woman with piercing eyes and a trembling voice approached her quietly. She looked out of place, not for how she was dressed, but for the intensity that clung to her every word. "I know this may sound unreasonable," she said softly, "but in the next 6 months, do not travel by airplane. If you do, your life will be in danger." Carole blinked, taken aback, then offered a half smile, a polite gesture to smooth over what must have seemed like a bizarre intrusion. "I have a flight scheduled in just a few days," she replied lightly. "But don't worry, I think I'll be just fine." 6 days later, on January 16th, her plane slammed into the jagged face of a Nevada mountain. There were no survivors. The country mourned the loss of one of its most radiant stars. But in a quiet corner of Washington, D.C., a different kind of silence fell, a chilling stillness that only comes when a terrible truth has just been proven right. The woman who had warned her, Jeane Dixon, at that moment, she was dismissed by most as a strange figure, whispering ominous things. But Carole's tragic end marked the beginning of a legacy that would span generations. Because that prophecy was only the beginning. Jeane Dixon wasn't a fortune teller sitting behind velvet curtains. She didn't read palms at carnivals. She walked in high society circles and was summoned to the White House. And over the years, her visions weren't vague allegories. They were surgical, razor sharp, and they kept coming. One crisp morning in November 1944, Jeane's telephone rang. "The president would like to see you," the voice said before the line cut off. Jeane didn't panic. She didn't ask why. She simply stepped into the black car waiting at her door and was driven to the White House. She had met President Franklin D. Roosevelt once before, during a fundraising event. But this time the atmosphere was different. No war briefings, no speeches, just one man tired, sick, but still holding the weight of a nation on his shoulders, asking a single question. "How much longer do I have in this role?" Jeane didn't flinch. "No more than 6 months," she said. On April 12th, 1945, Roosevelt passed away, exactly as she had foretold. His successor, Harry S. Truman, had been foretold by Dixon as well years earlier, when she told a relatively unknown senator that he would one day become president of the United States. But what truly made Jeane Dixon's abilities so unsettling was not just the accuracy of her visions, it was how early they began, and how impossible they seemed. From the moment she could speak, Jeane Dixon was different. Born in 1904, in the heart of Wisconsin, her childhood wasn't marked by games or toys, but by uncanny declarations that left even the adults speechless. At 5 years old, she asked her mother repeatedly for an envelope with a black border. Her mother refused. Puzzled there was no such envelope in the house. 10 days later, one arrived by mail. It was a funeral announcement. Her grandfather had died. The envelope, bordered in black, matched her description perfectly. At 7, she smiled at her mother and said, "Daddy's going to bring home a big black and white dog." No one had mentioned anything about a dog, no letters, no calls. But when her father returned from a business trip a few days later, that exact dog walked in beside him. And then came the meeting that would shape the rest of her life. In 1911, her parents took her to see a revered Egyptian palm reader in California. The woman studied Jeane's small hand, her eyes slowly widening. "Your daughter will be a great prophet," she whispered. "She can see across time." The palm reader placed a crystal ball into Jeane's hand, wrapped in a piece of silk. For a moment, the child was still. Then she spoke again. "Be careful with the stove," she said quietly. "You're about to get burned." Days later, the woman suffered a serious burn from a kitchen accident. By now, her family knew. This was no coincidence. Jeane wasn't guessing. She was seeing, and over the years, the visions grew bolder. She told her brother he would one day be a famous athlete. At the time, it sounded like childhood fantasy. 10 years later, he was honored as one of America's greatest football players. These early visions formed the foundation of Jeane Dixon's later fame. But what separated her from mere folklore was how her prophecies eventually began intersecting with the highest tiers of power. One of her first public predictions concerned British Prime Minister Winston Churchill in 1945. While visiting the Utonipur, Churchill asked Dixon directly, "Will I be re-elected?" Without hesitation, she said no. He was stunned, even insulted. After all, he had just led Britain through its darkest hour. Victory in World War II seemed to guarantee his place on the throne of British politics. But a few months later, Churchill lost the election. Another prophecy, another impossible outcome, and another terrifying realization Jeane Dixon wasn't guessing. She wasn't theorizing. She was reporting the future. But all of that was just the beginning. The world hadn't yet heard the prophecy that would shake the nation, and years later, the world down to its bones. By the time the 1950s rolled around, Jeane Dixon was no longer a nameless woman murmuring strange predictions in salons and private drawing rooms. Her name had begun to surface in newsprint, whispered in political circles, and murmured behind closed doors. There was something uncanny about her, something too precise to be dismissed and too frequent to be denied. Then came the prophecy that would cement her place in the American psyche forever. In 1956, Parade magazine published a striking article featuring Dixon's boldest prediction to date. She claimed that the Democratic nominee for the 1960 presidential election would win, but would not live to serve out his full term. He would be assassinated, she said, while still in office. It sounded outrageous, irresponsible, even dangerous. At the time, John F. Kennedy hadn't even declared his candidacy. No one took the prediction seriously. Not yet. But Dixon did. She saw more than just the end of a life. She saw the shadows that gathered before it. In the years that followed, her visions around Kennedy intensified. She described a darkness enveloping the White House, a nameplate with the president's name being wiped away by two black hands. And then, something even more chilling, a name. Not the full thing, but the structure of it, 5 or 6 letters. Beginning with an O, the second letter, an S, and the final letter shaped like a fishhook. On November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. The moment shocked the world. Television screens across the country flickered with one name. Lee Harvey Oswald? Oh, S.D. The final letter curled like a hook. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, years before the act ever occurred. Suddenly, Jeane Dixon wasn't just a mystic. She was the seer of Washington, the woman who foresaw the fall of Camelot. And the world listened now, perhaps not with full belief, but certainly with a fear that trembled just beneath the surface. From the death of Roosevelt to the rise of Truman, from Churchill's defeat to Kennedy's demise, Jeane Dixon had prophesied turning points that reshaped the 20th century. But her gift, if you could call it that, was never a comfort. It came wrapped in anguish. With every revelation, she bore the weight of futures she could neither change nor forget. This wasn't fortune-telling. This was destiny whispered through a cracked window, blown in like wind. But what made Dixon different wasn't just her accuracy. It was the depth of her foresight. Unlike many so-called psychics of her time, her visions weren't bound by years or even decades. They reached far beyond her own lifetime. And in the 1970s, she began to speak of a date that felt impossibly distant. 2025. It wasn't just one vague reference. It was repeated, insistent, urgent. In her book, The Call to Glory, Dixon described a coming crisis. She called it a war, but not one fought with tanks or guns. It would be a global war of disease, not long after. In the year 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, sweeping across the planet with terrifying speed and shutting down life as we knew it. Suddenly, people revisited her words. Was this the disease war she spoke of? If so, what came next? Because according to Dixon, 2020 wasn't the end, it was the beginning, the opening volley of something much larger. In her later writings, particularly in My Life and Prophecies, Dixon turned her gaze toward the year 2025. She described it as a bloody turning point. Not in the West, but in the East. Her vision was stark, a catastrophic conflict between two powerful nations, China and Russia. But this wasn't a traditional war over borders or treaties. It was a spiritual battle, she said, a fight for control over the destiny of humankind. And in the aftermath, she claimed, only one nation would stand above the rest, China. To many, it sounded implausible and imaginative fiction, especially given the complex alliance between those nations. But that wasn't the point. Dixon's prophecies were often less about literal battlefields and more about tides turning shifts in the global current invisible to the naked eye. And in 2025, as economies teeter and new global alliances form in the shadow of rising tensions, one can't help but ask, was she foreseeing a physical war or something more veiled? A cold war of commerce. A technological race. A spiritual confrontation between ideologies. These are not questions for the skeptics or the faithful alone. They're questions for all of us. Because Jeane Dixon's prophecies have never demanded belief, they have only asked to be remembered. And now, standing in the very year she warned about, her words no longer echo from the past. They resonate from the present, from every headline, every closed-door meeting, every strange occurrence that leaves us wondering if there's something much larger at play. But Jeane Dixon never claimed her visions were the end of the story. She once said that even in the darkest moments, a light would emerge, a figure of unimaginable love and compassion. Someone who would reconnect the severed threads of humanity, someone who would lead the world back from the brink. That's the paradox of her legacy. She foresaw destruction, but also hope. And in the next chapter of this mystery, we'll look beyond Dixon to those who, in completely different parts of the world, also saw something strange on the horizon of 2025. Prophecies rarely exist in isolation. Like echoes in a canyon, they seem to repeat distorted, shifted by culture, time, and voice, but still unmistakably connected. While Jeane Dixon's visions stunned the Western world across the Pacific Ocean, another prophetic voice had begun whispering something eerily similar. In 1999, long after Dixon's most active years, a Japanese manga artist named Tatsuki published a graphic novel that would later become the subject of countless internet forums, conspiracy theories, and late-night discussions among those who felt that something was coming, something big. The novel's title was simple, The Future I Saw. Inside its black and white pages were 15 dreams. Dreams the artist claimed were not metaphors, but prophetic visions, foretellings of real events that would shape the 21st century. And then, the dreams began coming true, not in vague approximations or poetic fragments, but in alarming, pinpoint detail. Earthquakes, tsunamis, political shocks, technological disasters. 14 of the 15 dreams unfolded just as she described, each one pulling her story further away from fiction and closer to something hauntingly real. Only one dream remained. The final dream. A vision so grand, so specific. It felt like the culmination of everything that came before. The date, July 5th, 2025. According to the dream, a seismic event of cataclysmic scale would erupt in the South China Sea. But this wasn't just another earthquake. In Tatsuki's vision, the ocean itself changed. A new landmass would rise from the depths, an unthinkable shift in the Earth's crust that would literally reshape geography. The land would stretch and connect parts of Japan with Taiwan, the Philippines, and Hong Kong. To the rational mind, it sounds absurd, but prophecies don't conform to reason. They demand that you listen before you understand. And Tatsuki's wasn't the only voice crying out from the east. In 2010, a mysterious figure appeared on an internet forum in Japan. He claimed to be a time traveler from the year 2062. Naturally, users laughed, mocked, prodded, but then something unsettling happened. In 2011, just days before one of Japan's worst natural disasters, the devastating March 11th earthquake and tsunami, the same account posted a warning. It was brief, vague, but urgent. Residents near the coast evacuate to higher ground. After the disaster struck, killing thousands and triggering the Fukushima nuclear crisis, users went back to find the message still there, time-stamped, archived. The thread exploded. Who was this person? How did they know? And then, as mysteriously as he arrived, the time traveler vanished. Until he returned. In 2022, using the same handle, he posted again. This time, his message was far more specific. Prepare for something never before seen. He wrote, "The South China Sea will not be calm in July 2025. Two prophecies, two timelines, two voices from opposite sides of the world, and both pointing to the same date, the same region, and the same sense of imminent transformation. Is it coincidence? A strange case of mass suggestion, a viral story spun out of control. Perhaps, but if that's true, then it would mean Jeane Dixon's prophecy about 2025, spoken decades before either of these modern predictions, was also a coincidence. That her vision of two powers clashing, of a rebirth through chaos, was just a lucky guess. And that's the kind of coincidence that starts to look a lot like fate. What's even more unnerving is how these prophecies differ not in theme, but in tone. Dixon saw blood and ascendance, a global reshaping, a victor emerging. Tatsuki saw the earth itself reshaping, land rising where sea once reigned. And the time traveler, he didn't see a victor or a geological shift. He saw danger, a threat so great that it demanded action before understanding. 3 visions, 3 layers, 1 story. Each builds on the next, not as a contradiction, but as a continuation. As if these scattered pieces across time and culture are puzzle fragments meant to be fit together. And in that combined narrative, a pattern emerges. 2025 isn't just a year of war or quakes or economic standoffs. It's a hinge point, a moment in history where the axis may tilt gently or violently, and the course of humanity will be decided not by a single nation or event, but by a convergence. The earth, politics, spiritual destiny, all touching the same spark. But here's the twist, the one few notice when they talk about these prophecies. They don't end in despair. Not Dixon's, not Tatsuki's, not even the time travelers. Each one, in its own way, suggests that after the upheaval comes something greater, a shift. Yes, but not the end. Perhaps a beginning? Dixon, in particular, spoke of a figure, a person not yet born in her time, but destined to rise amidst the turmoil of 2025. Someone who would embody compassion, clarity, and peace. A force of love powerful enough to weave broken nations back into a single tapestry. She didn't give a name, only a feeling, a presence, but she was certain. This wasn't just about war or disasters. This was about rebirth. So now, here we are months into the year 2025. No battlefield has yet lit up between China and Russia. No apocalyptic tsunami has yet risen from the South China Sea. No world leader has yet declared the dawn of a new era. Nor has a singular figure emerged to cradle the globe in compassion. And yet, something feels different. You can sense it in headlines that flicker with unease, in the volatile rhythm of markets, in the guarded tones of world leaders as they speak of the future in terms more cautious than ever before. There's a tension beneath the surface of everyday life, like the air before a storm, heavy and electric. And what if the prophecies were never meant to be literal blueprints, but warnings? Subtle alignments pointing not to fixed outcomes, but to choice points, moments in time, where the future becomes fragile, malleable, open to influence from forces both seen and unseen. Jeane Dixon believed that time was not a straight road, but a river, one that could shift its course under the right circumstances. And in her view, 2025 was a place where all tributaries, wars, diseases, ideologies, faiths would crash together. A whirlpool, a reckoning, and still a potential rebirth. In her book, My Life and Prophecies, Dixon described the vision that haunted her most. It wasn't a nuclear winter or a mushroom cloud. It wasn't a flaming sky or an earthquake swallowing cities. It was silence, not peace, but silence, the kind that comes after screaming, after chaos, when the world pauses as if holding its breath. In this vision, she saw cities dimmed, lights out, no gunfire, no shouting, just an eerie stillness, broken only by the sound of one thing. Footsteps, not of an army, not of monsters, but of one person walking alone, steady, calm, unwavering. This person, she said, would appear after the great crisis. Not before, not during, and with each step, the world would begin to breathe again. It's easy to scoff at such ideas, to roll our eyes at seers and prophets, especially in an age ruled by data and logic. But isn't it strange how these visions, these ancient, mystical impressions continue to align, even when the messengers never knew each other? Dixon, Tatsuki, and the anonymous time traveler each emerged from completely different cultures, decades apart, speaking in wildly different mediums. And yet all three pointed to 2025. All three described upheaval, and all three left us with a glimpse of something after the fall, something that wasn't destruction, but restoration. Could this be the true meaning of war in Dixon's vision? Not missiles, but internal fracture. Not armies, but ideologies battling for dominance. Not fire, but something slower, more insidious, a collapse of certainty, of trust, of connection. And then, from the ashes, a new unity not built on power, but on compassion. It's not as outlandish as it sounds. Already, we live in a world where disinformation spreads faster than truth, where people live entire lives divided by borders of thought, not land. Perhaps the war has already begun, and we didn't hear the first shots because they weren't fired from guns, but whispered through screens and echo chambers. And maybe the one destined to bring peace isn't a ruler or a general. Maybe they're a teacher, a scientist, an artist, someone forgotten by history's usual standards, but destined to become the thread that binds the unraveling cloth of humanity. Still, many people ask if Jeane Dixon was so accurate. Why haven't more of her predictions happened exactly as she said? But that's the thing about prophecy. It doesn't always arrive the way we expect. When you read her writings, a pattern emerges. Dixon's predictions often got the events right, but the participants or timing slightly wrong. It wasn't that she misled, it was that she saw a wave, but not always the precise direction of its crash. She saw Roosevelt's death down to the month. She saw JFK's assassination down to the name of his killer. But she also predicted conflict between Russia and China in 2025, a prophecy that hasn't materialized. At least, not yet. Still, we see something close. An escalating Cold War, China's growing assertiveness, a deepening divide between East and West. Maybe she saw this too, but through the haze of time, misread the players. And perhaps that's the most important truth of all. Prophecy isn't perfect. It's not a news report. It's not an algorithm. It's the shimmer of heat on the road ahead, the outline of something real, blurred by the winds of free will. Because in every vision of destruction, there is always the possibility of deviation. The prophecy may point toward darkness, but the response is ours to choose. Jeane Dixon once said, "We may not be able to stop the earth from trembling, nor hold back a storm, nor control the movements of the deep and restless sea, but we can choose whose hand we hold when those moments come." And maybe, in the end, that's the only prophecy that matters. Prophecies, like rivers, have tributaries, smaller streams feeding into one great current. And while Jeane Dixon's visions shaped the Western perception of 2025, the East offered its own mirror. A mirror that reflected the same unrest, but from different angles, with unfamiliar names and mythologies just as unsettling. This story doesn't end with Dixon. In fact, her prophecy may be just one voice in a global chorus joined by dreamers, artists, and anonymous strangers who've whispered warnings into the world, waiting for someone to listen. Let's begin again in Japan. It's the late 1990s. Tatsuki, an unassuming manga artist with no interest in sensationalism, begins documenting dreams that have disturbed her for years. These weren't abstract or whimsical. They had shape, texture. They carried dates and places, and worst of all, a sense of inevitability. In 1999, she gathered these dreams and published them as a graphic novel titled The Future I Saw. It wasn't meant as prophecy, it was simply her truth, set to ink. She never claimed to be psychic. She didn't seek fame. She just wanted the dreams to stop. But then the world shifted. Dream after dream unfolded in real life, natural disasters, political events, even personal tragedies involving strangers she could never have known. The public took notice. Analysts, skeptics, and mystics alike began scouring the book for clues, attempting to verify every image, every sequence. Out of 15 dreams, 14 came true. All but one, the final vision. It was more vivid than the rest. In it, Tatsuki saw an earthquake far greater than the one that devastated Japan in 2011. But this time, the disaster did not strike the mainland. It exploded beneath the sea in the South China Sea, a place politically and geographically unstable, bordered by superpowers and tension. The shockwaves from the quake didn't just rattle cities, they raised land from the depths of the ocean itself. A new mass of earth, rising like a colossal beast from slumber, physically connecting regions that had never touched Japan. Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Philippines. July 5th, 2025. That was the date burned into her memory. Not symbolic, not metaphorical, specific, and it hasn't happened yet. But that wasn't the only voice pointing toward that same summer. In the early 2010s, before the rise of social media swallowed the internet whole, there existed online communities built on strange ideas. On one of them, an anonymous poster appeared claiming to be a time traveler from the year 2062. At first, no one cared. Then the earthquakes hit. In early 2011, the poster issued a cryptic warning. People near the ocean must move to higher ground. The message was vague, lacking context or location. Users mocked it, forgot it. Then, on March 11th, one of the deadliest disasters in Japan's history unfolded. A 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck the Pacific Ocean floor, triggering a monstrous tsunami that took over 18,000 lives. In its wake, nuclear catastrophe, collapse, grief, and that forgotten forum post was rediscovered. The warning had been real. And it came days before the quake. Suddenly, the time traveler wasn't a joke anymore. His old threads became sacred text, and his reappearances sporadic. Brief were dissected like scripture. In 2022, he returned again. His new warning: the South China Sea will not be calm. Prepare for something never before seen in July 2025. No further details, no explanations, then silence. This is where the story fractures between belief and dismissal. Some say it's mass coincidence, that minds see patterns where none exist, that prophecy, like mythology, exists only to make sense of chaos. But then you look at the alignment, Jeane Dixon's prediction 2025, a geopolitical reckoning in the East. Tatsuki's dream, July 5th, 2025. A natural upheaval connecting fractured lands. The time traveler's message, July 2025, a never-before-seen disaster in the South China Sea. They don't speak the same language. They never met. They come from different times, different platforms, different intentions, and yet they all orbit the same date, the same place, the same looming unknown. You can dismiss one, maybe two, but all three, the probability collapses, and what's left is not certainty but urgency. What could it mean? Perhaps not literal tectonic shifts or exploding oceans. Perhaps it's not land that will rise, but power, a new alliance, a dramatic shift in regional dominance that redefines the geopolitical map just as violently as an earthquake. Or maybe, just maybe, it really will be the Earth itself, rising where we never expected it to, forcing us to draw new borders, rechart our oceans, and question everything we thought was solid beneath our feet. And amidst it all, Dixon's most cryptic vision still lingers, a person of boundless love and compassion, emerging from the wreckage. She didn't say who. She didn't say from where. Only that this person would help reconnect the severed threads between humanity. What if that's what the rising landmass means? Not geography, but unity. A reconnection of places once divided, now joined by something neither politics nor armies could have forged. Maybe prophecy isn't about doom. Maybe it's about readiness. Maybe it's about remembering, even in fear, that something beautiful may still rise from the ocean floor of despair. Prophecy is a mirror. It doesn't show us what must happen. It shows us what could. And if you followed the thread so far from Jeane Dixon's chilling visions to Tatsuki's dreams, and the anonymous whispers of a time traveler, you've likely felt it. That weight, that tension, that quiet pulse beneath the noise of everyday life, whispering something is coming. But here's the truth. Few dare to say aloud, maybe the real terror isn't in the prophecy itself. Maybe it's in how unprepared we are to face it. We live in an age where we've mistaken noise for knowledge, where we scroll endlessly through distraction, convincing ourselves we're informed. And yet when something real, something ancient and echoing presses against the edge of our awareness, we turn away, we laugh, we bury it beneath reason. But what if this year, 2025, really is different? Not because of what Dixon saw, not because of tectonic plates or geopolitical friction, but because we are standing at a threshold, and once crossed, there's no going back. Dixon didn't preach fear. That's the mistake people often make. She wasn't some doomsayer waving signs in the street. She believed in the potential of humanity. Even as she described war and division, she also saw light, not as an escape from the storm, but as the purpose within it. A reckoning year, she said. A crucible, not meant to destroy us, but to strip away what no longer serves. Old systems, old powers, old lies, and in the space left behind, something or someone new. She spoke often of a figure, not a ruler, not a warrior, but a being of love. Not in the soft, sentimental way we often use that word, but in its most radical form. Unshakable, piercing, transformative. This person, Dixon said, would come not with thunder or gold, but with quiet conviction. They would speak not just to nations, but to hearts. And somehow, that would be enough. Enough to spark a movement. Enough to tilt the world back toward the light. It sounds impossible. But then, so did all of her prophecies until they weren't. And if 2025 is the year of turning, then maybe we should stop asking what will happen and start asking who we will become in its wake. Because the truest prophecy has never been about predicting disaster. It's about preparing the soul. Here's the question. No one asks if you knew the future. Would you even want to? Most say yes, but that's because they imagine a future that's easy to know: a win, a promotion, a great love. But what if the future held something darker? Would you still look? Dixon did. Every day, and it weighed on her like an anchor around her ribs. She wasn't chasing fame, she was haunted by what she saw, by what she couldn't change, by the knowledge that even when she spoke, the world rarely listened. And still, she never stopped speaking, because some truths don't need to be believed to be remembered. And now, you're part of that memory, whether you believe it all or just find it fascinating. The story is inside you now. The dates, the visions, the warnings, the light. What you do with it, that's your choice. Maybe you'll dismiss it the way Carol Lombard once did. A polite smile, a nod, then walk away. Or maybe you'll keep an eye on the horizon. Maybe you'll pay more attention to what's rising beneath the waves, behind the headlines, within yourself. Because when the storm comes, and it always does, it won't be your knowledge that saves you. It'll be your clarity, your compassion, and the hand you choose to reach for in the dark. Jeane Dixon once said, "We may not be able to stop the earth from trembling, but we can choose whose hand we hold when those moments come." So maybe that's the real message of 2025. Not doom, not fire, just a test of who we are, of how ready we are to remember what we've long forgotten, and of how deeply we believe that, even in our darkest hour, someone somewhere will still be walking toward us with light in their hands.